it's Kelly here. Welcome to my channel if this is your first time, and welcome back if you've been before. Very glad to have you either way. Today we are talking about a very exciting thing. Well, I think it's exciting anyway. And that is, in 2022, my goal is to read more Australian books. Books written by Australians, books written about Australians. And to facilitate this, I have created a challenge on the Storygraph, which has 12 prompts. We're going to go through them today, and I am going to show you some of the books that I have found. So I've done the thing that they call shopping your shelves. So I don't want to buy any new books. I want to read books I already have. I have found like a lot of books that I can use. Please excuse the jingling. That is my cat Charlie. So let's have a chat about these books. Let's go through the prompts together, and I am going to give you some ideas. If you'd like to join in, this challenge is available, and I will leave the link to it below. It's on the Storygraph if you're already there. If you're not, get on there, it's great. And one of the great things that you can do on the Storygraph, of course, is to participate in challenges, and it will help you to track the books that you are reading, and kind of give you some really interesting information too about the kinds of books you've been reading throughout the year. So because this is my goal, and because I know that for some of you as well, this could be a goal for you too, then I wanted to share it with everybody. So as I said, the link will be below in the description box. So please make sure to check that out if you'd like to join in. Now, you do not have to be Australian to join in. I will give you the alternative for for the first prompt. It's only really one prompt that's going to affect you if you're not an Australian, and that is prompt number 1. So without much further ado, let's get into the prompts. Well, prompt number 1 is a book set in your home state. Now, if you are not Australian and you don't have a home state, I would encourage you, for the purposes of this challenge, just to adopt one. And if you'd like, I'd like to offer my own home state of New South Wales as one of your options. And I'm going to show you some of the books that I found on my shelves that are set in New South Wales. Some of them are set in Sydney. I think probably most of them. Yeah, probably most. Although, we'll see. We'll see as we go along. A lot of them are set in Sydney, but there are some that are in other parts of New South Wales as well. The first book today is Razorhurst by Justine Larbalestier. I know the last time I talked about this book, I also struggled with the pronunciation of this author's surname, so I apologize profusely. So this is a book that is set in the 1930s in a part of Sydney called Darlinghurst, so hence Razorhurst. And at the time, we had a big gang problem that was where people would use razors were a very common weapon used at the time. So they called them the razor gangs. So this is a book set at that time. In the past, it would also work for one of the other challenges in this challenge, which is about historical fiction set in Australia. But I am including it here in the book set in my home state of New South Wales. The second book today is, I'm juggling a pile here on my lap. This is a historic one. It's called The Harp in the South by Ruth Park. This would also work for the Classic Books Challenge as prompt in the challenge as well. But this is, it was published in 1948, and it was also her first novel. So it would also work for the debut book prompt as well. So it says here, The Harp in the South is a nostalgic and moving portrait of the eventful family life of the Darcys of number 12.5 Plymouth Street in Sydney's Surrey Hills. So that is a classic Australian book, The Harp in the South, and also set in Sydney in New South Wales. This one is not set in Sydney. Well, I think part of it is set in Sydney, but then the protagonist moves to the south coast of New South Wales, and it's called The Labyrinth by Amanda Lowry. Now, this was shortlisted for the Miles Franklin. I can't remember. I think this may have been the winner of the Miles Franklin Award this year in 2021. And it's all about a woman who is an artist. No, her son is an artist, and he is put into prison, and she moves from the city, from Sydney, down the south coast to a little, it says a sleepy hamlet on the south coast, near to where her son Daniel is serving his sentence, and she is by the ocean. And she starts to obsess over building a labyrinth. To create it, to navigate the path through her quandary, Erica will need the help of strangers, and that will require her to trust and reckon with her past. The Labyrinth is a story of guilt and denial, of the fraught relationship between parents and children. It is also an examination of how art can be ruthlessly destructive and restorative. Mesmerizing yet disquieting, it shows Amanda Lowry to be at the peak of her powers. Sounds pretty good. Another very famous Australian author, or very well-regarded Australian author, is Helen Garner. And on my shelves, I had a book called The Spare Room. And I believe it only cost me $2, which is nice. The sticker's still on the back. I believe this is about a woman who is preparing a spare room for her friend who's coming to visit. And she is coming to visit because she is doing cancer treatment. And yeah, so it's sort of about this relationship between these two women. I've already spoken about this book, but let's just briefly mention it again. This is called The Last Woman Hanged, and this is a non-fiction book about the last woman who was hanged in New South Wales. Her name was Louisa Collins, and it's by Caroline Overington. And I am quite interested in finding out more about this because I think this goes into the case itself, and it looks at, you know, looking at the evidence through modern eyes and considering, was this woman actually guilty or not? Was she targeted, etc., etc. So it should be a bit of an interesting read. And the final book that I have for you in this category is also a classic, I would say, and I have a beautiful edition of it. The book is called Looking for Alabrandi. If you went to high school in the, I'm going to say 90s, and possibly even still, I don't know. This was an often prescribed text in high school. I know my sister read it when she went through high school, but I did not. If you did read it in high school, then it will work very well for the final prompt, which I'll get to a bit later on, which is where you're going to reread a book that you remember reading in high school or in primary school if you went to school in Australia. So this could be one of the books that you choose. But I did not read this at school, and I have never read it. So I have this gorgeous, gorgeous edition of it. And it is, these editions are, you'll see a couple of these pop up. They are illustrated by one of my favorite illustrators, Alison Colpoys. And she has her gorgeous little illustrations, but I know this one is set in the inner west of Sydney because that is where I grew up. So if you know that area well, then you will recognize a lot of the places that are in here. There's also a film version of this book as well. But Looking for Alabrandi is sort of a coming of age high school read, and I definitely would at some point like to read this, and perhaps this is the time. But as you can see, I have quite a stack here to choose from just for prompt 1. So let's wait and see how that goes. Okay, prompt number 2 is a book set in a different Australian state. So I am in New South Wales, so I am going to be selecting from one of the other states. Of course, you need to personalize it to you if you're going to do this challenge. So I may have some suggestions here that might work for you for another state, but they might also be your home state. So hopefully, and I think I've only got books that are set, and I will let you know which ones, but I've got books from Victoria. I think I have a South Australian one. I've definitely got some from WA, and some from Queensland. Not so sure about the other states, because as I say, I don't want to buy any new books, so I was just shopping my shelves. So let's see what we've got here. Now, I have so many books to show you here that I'm just going to keep them on my cart, and I'm going to be reaching over and grabbing a couple as I go. Okay, so the first one I've got for you is Drylands by Thea Astley. Now, this is set in a small country town in possibly Queensland. It's kind of hard to tell. I've seen, when I was looking up to research where it was set, I couldn't get a definitive answer, but a lot of people talked about this being a book about Queensland. So I'm assuming that that is said somewhere in the book, and is somehow clear. So basically, this is about a small country town. I think it's an invented town. I don't think it's a real town, called Drylands. And this is told from multiple perspectives of people who live in that town. And it's sort of like a, small country town life kind of book. So that's book number one. Here's another book from that series that I was talking about just before, that's illustrated by Alison Colpoys. And this is Blueback by Tim Winton. And this one is set in Longboat Bay in WA. Now, this is a nice short one. It's a junior fiction, and this is definitely one that's got a lot more illustration in it. And they've got these gorgeous little end papers sort of, but throughout, like after each chapter. I guess that was just to kind of flesh it out a little bit, but it's also got some of these gorgeous little illustrations there too. So this is a book about, I think, boys' love of the ocean, and I guess the inhabitants therein. So yeah, set in WA in Western Australia. Another Tim Winton book here, also set in WA, and this is Dirt Music. I've heard it said that Tim Winton has the sort of voice of Western Australia. Like, he really loves to promote his state and to kind of to show the kind of picturesque elements of Western Australia, and he does that very effectively through his writing. I have never read a Tim Winton before, but I am definitely keen to, so this may be my time. Actually, I tell a lie. I have read a Tim Winton before, but I've only read a Tim Winton picture book before. I've not read one of his novels for adults, so this could be the time. But Dirt Music is all about... so it's set in WA, and it goes through lots of different places in WA, where when I was looking it up, it mentions Broome, it mentions an island off the coast of the Kimberley, it mentions Kununurra. This was also shortlisted for the Booker Prize and won the Miles Franklin Award in 2002. So this is a very well awarded and loved book of Tim Winton's, so I'm assuming it's going to be a good read. But essentially we've got again, I believe, a sort of a small coastal town, and a woman ends up having an affair with a man who is fishing in an area he's not supposed to be fishing in, so he's technically poaching. And then things kind of escalate, and he ends up on the run, trying to get away from, I'm assuming, her husband, who is also, I believe, a fisherman. So it sounds like a really intriguing plot, but also it's going to be going through lots and lots of different places in Western Australia. So this could be a good option if you are looking for something that is going to give you a picture of the state. So that is 2 Tim Wintons that I had on my shelves. I've also got some other books here that we have spoken about before on this channel. One is The Dry. Now, I had this on my TBR for December. I know now, I'm filming this just before Christmas. I know I'm not going to get to this one in December, so I'm hoping, I think, to take this one away with me and possibly read it in January. We'll see how we go. But this is The Dry by Jane Harper. Also has been made into a It's either a film or it's a TV series. And I believe it has Eric Banner in it. I'm not 100% sure on that. But it's set in a fictional town. However, they do locate it within Victoria. And I think it's sort of... so the town is called Kiawarra, which does not exist, but it is in Victoria, and it's sort of, I believe we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So that's that one. Another one that I am definitely very keen to read, which I think I will definitely take away with me on my January holidays, is The Monster of Her Age by Danielle Binks. I've mentioned this one before. I read a Danielle Binks book called The Year the Maps Changed earlier this year and 100% loved it. It was a real kind of surprise. I didn't know anything about it going in, and it was just beautifully written. So I'm very, very keen to read this one. It's set in Tasmania, in Hobart, and I am super, super keen to read this one. Another one that I'm definitely going to read, possibly in February when we get closer to Valentine's Day, is called Love Stories by Trent Dalton. Now, I'm being a bit cheeky by putting this one in here because the stories may be set there. It's a series, it's short stories, so they may be set in kind of different places, and I can't guarantee that they are all set in Queensland, in Brisbane, but that is where he collected the story. So all of the people telling the stories, So Trent Dalton, the author, sat outside with his typewriter with a sign saying, "Tell me a love story," or something to that effect. And people would come and tell him stories, and some of which he turned into short stories that went into this book. So he did that in Brisbane, which is in Queensland. So I'm being a bit cheeky by including it, but I definitely really want to read this one. So it's on the list. Then we've got Crow Country by Kate Constable, and this is set in a town called Boort, Boort, which I've never heard of before, but it's near Bendigo in Victoria. I don't know. No, it is a real place. So she is not a First Nations author, but it does touch on the Aboriginal stories and history of the area in which she's writing. And as I was sort of having a look at it, there is a foreword here, which is written by Elder Gary Murray, which was written in 2011, and he has, I guess, so talks about the area and also talks about the story and how the people of that area, well, he's speaking on behalf of the people of that area, and that they are saying that they like the story. So they're kind of saying it's okay. It's not written by a First Nations author, but it's a good story and is a respectful story. So I would like to read this one. It's been on my shelf for some time. I just picked it up at some point when I was secondhand shopping somewhere. I can't even remember. And it does look interesting. It's a YA, I think. So I am looking forward to that one at some point. Another YA that we've got here is called Jasper Jones, and this is written by Craig Silvey, who wrote one of my favourite books of the year, which I will mention towards the end of this video when I talk about some of the books I have read that could work for some prompts. That book is called Honeybee, and it is probably my favourite book that I've read this year in 2021. So this book came like 11 years before Honeybee, and was very well known. He didn't write anything in between these two books. He sort of disappeared for a little while. So this is one that a lot of people love, and I'm very interested to read about it. It's set in again in a fictional town called Corrigan, but it's in Western Australia. So that could work very well for this prompt. Another book that I've got here that's set in a fictional town, this time in Queensland, is called Hinterland by Stephen Lang. And it says, when I was researching this one, it said it's a very close clone to the town of Maleny in Queensland, which is in the hinterland of southern Queensland. So that could work here. And I know this one is an environmental type of book, so it's about activism. I think it's to do with the potential for a dam being built in the area, which is going to cause some environmental problems, but so it's kind of like looking at different perspectives of that, and kind of you know, looking at from the point of view of the government and local people, and you know, why they want to build the dam and why it might not be the best idea. So it should be an interesting one. Hinterland by Stephen Lang. Almost at the end of this stack. I've got 4 more for you. Whoop. That one is a big one, and I'll pop it at the bottom of the stack here. Okay, I've got one that I am definitely going to read, and I definitely plan to bring with me on my summer holidays. I could very easily just do this prompt, couldn't I? With all the books that I definitely want to read. This one is called Boy Swallows Universe by Trent Dalton. And this was his kind of breakout hit. It's not his debut, but it was his massive hit that has been subsequently followed up. Trent Dalton is the author of Love Stories that I mentioned just before. This one's called Boy Swallows Universe, and it is set in Brisbane, Queensland. Something a little bit different is called by Favel Parrett, is called There Was Still Love. Now this one is set in Melbourne, Victoria. However, it's also set in Prague, and it is about a family, an immigrant family moving to Melbourne in the 80s, and it's sort of about about memory, about family. And about love, of course, obviously, by the title as well. I'm intrigued as to what the meaning of this fox on the cover, but that one is set in Melbourne. We have a book here by Richard Flanagan, which is The Living Sea of Waking Dreams, and it is set in Hobart, Tasmania. Which should be an interesting one to read. This was given to me by my brother's girlfriend's mum as a sort of very long-term loan, because I cannot be trusted with a short-term loan. I definitely do not get to the books quick enough for a short-term loan. So this is by Richard Flanagan, who is a very highly praised author in Australia. One of his books, which I will mention in a different category, was the winner of the Booker Prize. I think it was the Booker Prize a couple of years ago. So we'll talk a bit more about that. Anyway, he is a very well-respected author, and the person who gave this to me was very excited about it and wanted me to read it because she thought it was amazing. So I definitely would like to get to this at some point this year, I think. And the last one I have in this category is set near Echuca in Victoria, and it is A Home Like Ours by Fiona Lowe. This is a chunky one. I purchased this book not realizing it was as thick as it is. So because I bought it online, and obviously you can't tell. I should have checked before I ordered it. I basically ordered this because of how gorgeous the cover is. So I don't know if the story is going to be as good as the cover, but I hope so. And at some point I will read this. I don't know if it's going to be this year, but this could be one for you if you are looking for something in Victoria. So that is it for that section. We have passed our big chunky sections now. I wanted to give you lots of options for those first two, because I know that people will be in different states or might choose to adopt different states. And I also just happen to have quite a lot. Those two are quite good catch-all sections of this challenge, because realistically, most books that are set in Australia are going to be set in a state. So if you've got a book that you are looking to kind of wedge in, because it's an Australian book and you can't sort of find anywhere else for it to go, I would recommend leaving those two categories till last in your planning, so that you can wedge in anything that you definitely want to include. All right, let's move on to the third one. Okay, the third challenge prompt is a book written by an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander author. I've got 3 books to show you that are real, as in physical books, and then I also have 3 books on that I have on ebook that I am going to include in this prompt as well. The first one is called Swallow the Air by Tara June Winch. This was shortlisted for the Age Book of the Year for fiction. It's a short little thing, and Tara June Winch has subsequently written a book, the name of which escapes me, but I will pop it up on the screen, that could also work for this prompt, obviously, but was very well received, and she's sort of come to a lot of prominence because of it. But this, I believe, was written before that one, so this was published in 2006. I also have a short story collection, which also includes, I believe, Tara June Winch, I believe, is there. Yes, she is. And it is called Flock, First Nations Stories Then and Now, edited by Ellen Van Neerven. So this has some short stories from lots of different authors, including Tara June Winch. We've got Melissa Lukashenko, who wrote Too Much Lip, that I read earlier this year and really enjoyed. We've got Tony Birch. And then we've also, it says here, it's also got some rising stars, such as Adam Thompson and Michaela Saunders. So I'm interested to read some of these short stories and find out a little bit more about these authors, possibly find some authors that I didn't know that I would like, and sort of just work off their style to see if that is a good fit for the kinds of books that I like to read. So I am very interested in getting to this one at some point very, very soon. I also have, I've got a very precarious stack that is now basically up to where going above my hips from where I'm sitting, so just a bit concerned that it's going to fall. I also have this non-fiction book called Mutton Fish, The Surviving Culture of Aboriginal People and Abalone on the South Coast of New South Wales. So this could also work for the New South Wales prompt. It's by Beryl Cruz, Liddy Stewart and Sue Norman. And this is a sort of a, it's got some bits about people. It's got bits about the things they were collecting in the ocean. It's talking a little bit about trade and so on. So I'm very interested, and it has a little map here to give you the kind of range of area that we're talking about here. So it goes down from Wollongong down to basically the Victorian border. So sort of south of Sydney, which is an area where I enjoy going on my holidays. So which is where I'm heading for my holidays. Maybe I will take this with me. We'll see. I'm very interested to read more about that. Now, I've also got 3 books. Ooh, precarious pile. If you hear a big crash, you'll know why. So I've also got some books on my e-reader, and they are Catching Telecrow by Amberlyn Quay-Molina and Ezekiel Quay-Molina. I've also got The Interrogation of a Charla Wolf by Amberlyn Quay-Molina and Salt by Bruce Pascoe. And I am very keen on reading every single one of those books, so we'll have to wait and see. Hopefully I will be able to get to lots and lots more than I even anticipate, but definitely got lots of good options for this prompt, a book written by an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander author. Prompt number 4 we are up to here, and that is a book written by a new to you author. So obviously this is going to be a very personal thing, because obviously just because I haven't read that author doesn't mean you haven't read that author. So I've just got 4 books here that I'm going to mention. One of them was A Christmas Present. This is Any Ordinary Day by Lee Sales, which I am very interested to read about. Lee Sales is a journalist here in Australia, and she wrote this basically about it says on the cover it says blindsides, resilience, and what happens after the worst day of your life. So she's talking, I think, a little bit about some of the things she's reported on as a journalist. So she's talking about people who have experienced trauma, who have been involved in or have been subject to terrorism or to natural disasters and things like that, or just really, really bad luck, things that have just happened to people. So she's kind of looking at how people respond to that, and I guess also the impact on her too. and it's supposed to be quite candid and empathetic. So thank you very much, Louisa, for this book. I'm very interested to get to it ASAP. I also have another book, which is a short story collection called Black Juice, and it is by Margot Flanagan. Now, the astute among you will know that I have a book on my TBR, also by Margot Flanagan. So if I get to that in December, which I'm planning to, then this will no longer be able to work in this category because this will not be a new to me author. But it is a short story collection, and it is supposed to be quite good, so I'm quite interested to get to that. It was shortlisted for the Children's Book Council of Australia Awards in the year that it was released, and it won the 2004 Victorian Premier's Literary Award, which is a great recommendation. The Rain Heron by Robbie Arnott is another one that I'm very keen to get to, as you may have heard me talk about it, so I won't go on about it here. I don't know where this one is set, so I couldn't include it in one of my home state or different Australian state categories. So I'm going to put it here because I haven't actually read anything by Robbie Arnott yet. So I am very keen to get to this, and I think I will. And the other one I'm including here is The Barrier by Shankari Chandran. I mentioned this book a little while ago. This is written by a person that I know, but I have never read any of her books before, so I'm very interested to get to it. I'm not sure if this is her debut. It may be, in which case it could also work in that category there. Prompt number 5. This is a book featuring an Australian place name in the title. So I've got 5 books to show you here. Some of them are fiction, some of them are non-fiction. The first one is called Alice on the Line, and it is about Alice Springs, the history of Alice Springs. Could also work in the history section as well. So the town that is Alice was a telegraph station when Doris Bradshaw Blackwell went there as a young girl in 1899. So this was written... She is one of the authors here. So this is like a memoir. Mrs. Blackwell's father, Thomas Bradshaw, was officer in charge of Alice Springs Telegraph Station from 1899 to 1908. He took his young family from Oodnadatta, the railhead, on a buggy ride of more than 300 miles. In this book, with the collaboration of Territory author Douglas Lockwood, she has recaptured the atmosphere of those early days, only 30 years after the construction of the OT line and 40 years after John McDougall Stewart first crossed the continent from south to north. So it's a personal memoir set in Alice Springs, which is in the Northern Territory. So that could also work for that area. I've also got a non-fiction book called Ruth Park Sydney. So you will have heard me speaking about The Harp in the South, which is by Ruth Park. She's also written this, which is talking all about Sydney. So getting to know my own city where I live sounds like a good idea to me. A very specific part of Sydney that I could learn about is the Cemeteries of Sydney. So this is Sydney Cemeteries, a field guide by Lisa Murray. I am super interested in cemeteries just from a historic point of view, and also I guess from a social point of view of the spaces that we use to commemorate death and to inter remains in various forms. So, and I have been known to hang out at a cemetery from time to time to read the headstones. I used to live next to a cemetery, a very small one that was in a churchyard. So very interesting topic for me, but set in Sydney. So it works. I've also got a fiction book called Bruny by Heather Rose, which is set on Bruny Island, I believe. Which this I think has had quite mixed reviews, but I know, so one of my friend Jen read this and didn't like it. My mum read this and really liked it. So I guess it is I'll have to wait and see whether I'm going to be a like it or a not like it kind of person for that book. And another book that I have mentioned quite recently is The Shelley Bay Ladies Swimming Circle by Sophie Green. I believe it's the Shelley Bay. There's a lot of places called Shelley Bay or Shelley Beach in Australia, so I guess, you know, it's a bit unimaginative. It's a beach and it's got shells, or it's a bay with shells. So I guess it could be the one that's one of the ones that's in New South Wales, but it could be elsewhere. I'm not 100% sure, but we'll find out. This one is set in 1982, so it's a historic fiction as well. So I'm sure it's going to be talking about some of the cultural and social things of that time, as well as it's also, I think, a lot about female friendship, so it should be a good one. Now, I do not have too many for prompt number 6. I've actually only got 2 books to show you. The prompt is a book featuring an animal or plant native to Australia. So, of course, we've got Blinky Bill with the lovable koala. And I've also got Dot and the kangaroo. So also 2 Australian classics that could also work in that section as well. But I don't have too many to go with this prompt. So it's a quick one. Prompt number 7 is a biography or autobiography about an Australian, and I've got a couple of books to show you, and also a couple that are on my e-reader. So I've got The Trauma Cleaner, which is written by Sarah Krasnostein, and it is about Sandra Pankhurst, who is a trans woman who runs a specialized trauma cleaning service. So this is, you know, the people who go in and clean up where there's a lot of, like, you know, blood or vomit, or, you know, it could be a hoarder house, it could be all sorts of things. So it looks like to be an interesting job as for one, but also it goes through the transition that Sandra went through as well. So it should be really interesting to read about that as well. So I can only imagine that this is going to be a really fascinating read about a fascinating Australian. I've also got a book called Modern Love, The Lives of John and Sunday Reid. Now, John and Sunday Reid are not famous in the sense of being artists or, you know, actors or anything like that. But they were, I think, quite... they were sort of part of a bohemian set that were around, I'm not sure what era, but the photos are black and white. I'm guessing it's going to be perhaps the 30s or 40s. I'm not really sure, but they sound like really interesting people. And basically they've been champions of successive generations of Australian artists and writers. Yeah, so it's sort of just talking about their lives, and also, I guess, the people that they were involved with in their bohemian ways. So it should be quite interesting. The other one I've got to show you is The Diaries of Ethel Turner, which is compiled by Philippa Poole. Ethel Turner is probably one of Australia's earliest and definitely probably most well-known writers for children, and she lived a very interesting life. So I am quite interested to read her diaries and to learn more about her. Also, I have a couple of books on the Kindle. So I've got Vida by Jacqueline Kent, and this is a book about Vida Goldstein, who was a women's rights activist and probably one of the earliest ones in Australia. So definitely an interesting life to learn more about. And I've also got a book called Your Own Kind of Girl by Claire Bowditch, who is a musician who I have followed for some time, and it is her memoir. Okay, we are on to another one that's a little bit of a bigger section of this video, a book about Australian history or a historical fiction set in Australia. So I mentioned before Richard Flanagan, and I showed you one of his other books. Here is the one that was the winner, and it was the Man Booker Prize. Sorry, Richard Flanagan, The Narrow Road to the Deep North, and it won the prize in 2014. So it should be a good read. I've also got this book, which is called Rush O, and it is about whaling, and it's set in Eden in New South Wales, so it also could work for that section too. And it is chronicling a particularly difficult season of 1908, and it's basically about whaling, which was a big part of Australian history, certainly not part of it now, but it definitely was back in the day, and it's quite an interesting sort of part of our history, a bit sad part of our history, but also interesting to kind of learn about what it was like and what the lives were like of the people that were involved. And this is told from the perspective of the daughter of a whaler rather than from the whaler himself. So yeah, it sounds like a pretty interesting one. And also a family of whalers form a fond, unique allegiance with a pod of frisky killer whales, and in particular a killer whale named Tom. So that sounds quite interesting, and I would definitely like to get to this one by Shirley Barrett. Start a new pile. Okay, I've also got this one called Picturesque Pursuits by Caroline Jordan, and it's colonial women artists and the amateur tradition. And this not only has the story of these amateur artists, but also has lots of visuals as well. So we get to see some of the gorgeous artworks that these women created in the early days of Australia. I've also got another historical one here called Curious Minds, The Discoveries of Australian Naturalists by Peter McInnes. And this is all about classifying animals and plants. Again, there's lots of beautiful illustrations in here too. A lot of them are original from the time. So that should be a pretty interesting read too. And then I have Young Dark Emu. Now, I have read Dark Emu and would highly recommend it either in this category or in the Aboriginal author category. But I have not read Young Dark Emu yet, which is by Bruce Pascoe, who I mentioned earlier with his book Salt, that I have in the Aboriginal author category. But yeah, Dark Emu is a must read for everybody. It's really interesting just to learn about a side of history that we were not taught when we were at school. Partly in some ways because it wasn't known, I'm not blaming my teachers, but also partly just because of the attitudes of the settlers when they came to Australia and deemed the Aboriginal people who were already in Australia as being sort of nomadic and not settled, whereas in fact, while some probably were, some of them certainly weren't, and they had permanent fixtures, and there's a lot of evidence of things that, like grinding mills and so on, that show that people were making things and were setting up fish traps and all sorts of things that would be were definitely evidence of a more settled life. So that I've got Young Dark Emu here, but I definitely also recommend Dark Emu, which is the one written for adults. I've also got a couple of books on the Kindle for you too, and actually just the one, The Wool Grower's Companion by Joy Rhodes, which is a historical fiction. All right, we're getting towards the end now of the challenge prompts. This one is a book set in the bush or outbook, prompt number 9. Did I say outbook? I meant outback if I did say outbook. Sorry about that. The first one is My Brilliant Career, which is written by Miles Franklin. And you may have heard me mention the Miles Franklin Award earlier in this video. That's who it's named after. She was a female author who wrote under her quite ambiguous part of her name, so that it sounded as though she was a man, which was a thing that women apparently had to do at the time to get their work published. But I believe I've read this before. I think I have. I've certainly seen the film. This edition actually has 2, and I've owned this for a very long time. So this has 2 books in it. So it's got the first one, My Brilliant Career, but then it's also got the sequel, My Career Goes Bung. So that's the division there. So probably about 2/3 of it is My Brilliant Career. So it's about a woman who goes to a small country town to become, I think it's like a governess. She teaches young children. That's a governess, right? I don't know what the technical term is. Some kind of private teacher. Anyway, and it's sort of about her life adjusting to being in that place, and also some of the things that happened to her out there, and her kind of coming into her womanhood and her career as a writer. It's probably semi-autobiographical, isn't it? And then I found this one. I actually do not remember acquiring this book, but it's perfect for this category. It's called Pioneer Women of the Bush and Outback. So it's a non-fiction book about the lives of women. There's lots and lots of photographs as well, of basically just chronicling the lives of women that lived in the good old days out in the bush or the outback. So that should be an interesting one to read as well. Prompt number 10 is an Australian classic. Now, I have definitely mostly gone down the route of a for children Australian classic, because that's what I had on my shelves, but you could also look at some of the many Australian classics written for adults. I'm just shopping my own shelves here. So I've got another book from that gorgeous series illustrated by Alison Colpoys, and this is Picnic at Hanging Rock. Sorry, things are just falling off my shelf there, left, right and centre. Picnic at Hanging Rock by Joan Lindsay. Look at the gorgeous cover. It's just amazing. I really love these naked hardbacks. I just think they're beautiful. Again, we've got some beautiful illustrations from Alison Colpoys. And this is definitely a classic. It was written... in 1967, so it's written some time ago now, and I believe it is about some girls who go on a picnic and either one of them or all of them go missing. I can't remember. So it's a bit spooky. So that's Picnic at Hanging Rock. This one is for adults one. It's called The Thorn Birds by Colleen McCulloch. And this was written, I also believe, possibly in the 60s, 70s. So it was written in 1977. And I believe it is some about different people who I assume are the Thorn Birds, because each of the chapters has a year range. So the first one is 1915 to 1917, and it's got a name. So the first one is Meggie, but they're all different people, and so it begins in 1915 and it ends in 1969. So I don't know whether they are related to one another, generations perhaps, not sure, or just, I don't know, people who live in the same house maybe. I don't know. I actually don't know much about this book at all, but it should be an interesting one. Then we've got The Magic Pudding, and this is written and illustrated by Norman Lindsay. So as you can see, it's got some very interesting illustrations here. Some interesting characters too. It's about a pudding that comes to life, or that is alive. The pudding is cantankerous, not a pleasant character, I believe. Clearly we've also got a koala here. So it's all very whimsical and imaginative. And it was written some time ago. It's definitely a classic. So it was first published in 1918, so a very, very long time ago. And another classic we've got is Snugglepot and Cuddle Pie by May Gibbs. This edition is from the 80s, I believe. And the interesting thing is the ink that it's printed in is brown. I don't know if you can see that. It's kind of like a sepia brown. And it was first published in 1940. And it's about the gumnut babies. Snugglepot and Cuddle Pie, I believe, was the first one. But they're sort of these little cherubic characters so it's all about kind of Australian animals and plants. So yeah, a classic, Snugglepot and Cuddle Pie. Almost at the end. We are up to prompt number 11 now, and that is a debut book by an Australian author. I've got a couple to show you here, and then I've also got one on the Kindle. So I'm going to start with Now That I See You, which I mentioned in, I think it was my last video, or one that was not too long ago, by Emma Batchelor, and it is all about a it's called autofiction, which I had never heard that term before, but it's a fictionalized autobiography. And it was published in 2021. And it is all about, so a man comes out to his partner, his female partner, as trans, and it's sort of about the, as he transitions into she, the sort of unwinding of that relationship and sort of how it kind of disintegrates over time, which is very sad. So don't read this if you are in the mood for something chirpy, but definitely sounds like something really interesting and something I haven't read before, so I'm very interested to get to that one at some point. I've also got another book that I've mentioned in my previous video as well, The Loudness of Unsaid Things by Hildy Hinton, which is all about a girl whose mother is in some kind of residential mental health facility, and we've got so the daughter of a woman who's in there, and then also one of the workers there, and it's sort of, I believe, about the relationship that they build and what they learn through that process. One that I haven't mentioned before on this channel is Friends and Dark Shapes by Kavita Bedford. I almost put this one in the New South Wales category until I realised it was a debut as well. So this is set in Redfern, which is in the middle of Sydney, and it's sort of about a group of friends that move into a share house and what happens. Sort of a book about and by a young person, and what it's like living in share accommodation, and one of those kind of rites of passage of being a person in your early 20s, I guess. The other book that I've got on the Kindle is also by Robbie Arnott, who I've mentioned before in one of the other categories, with his debut Flames, which I own on the Kindle. All right, we are up to the final prompt here, and that is probably a favourite of mine, which is revisiting an Australian picture book, a junior fiction book, or a novel you remember reading at school. Now, I really struggled with this one to find anything other than picture books, because I guess the ones that I remember in terms of junior fiction and also novels that I read in high school were mostly from other places, which is really sad. So I really hope that is something that has shifted over time since I was at school. But I have two picture books to show you today, and I feel like this is one that should be quite personal. And I have very strong memories about these two picture books. So the first one is called Stories from Our Street by Richard Tulloch, illustrated by Julie Vivas, who at the time was one of my favourite illustrators, and still is, but I've definitely kind of moved on to. And I have owned this book. Technically, I've stolen it from my sister. Sorry, Lauren. But I have written my name in the front of it as well, and also stamped it with my school stamp. Okay, so this is actually 3 stories in one, and it's basically just the shenanigans of kids hanging out in their street, in their local area, at the park, neighbours, that sort of thing. So and I still read this book to children and they still love it. It's a really, really good book. So I would definitely recommend this one. Now, my memory that is associated with this one is the author actually came to our school, and I remember the author visit when I was a kid. This was not the book he was promoting. I believe the book he was promoting was another one that I quite like, called Danny in the Toy Box, so I would recommend that one too. I just couldn't find a copy of it to show you in this video, but it's also great. So yeah, that was my memory from primary school of Richard Tulloch. And then the other book is not so much a school memory as a play school memory. So I don't know if you guys are of the same era as me of play school. So play school is sort of very much like our kind of version of Sesame Street. Well, not really. It's very different to Sesame Street, but it was our like prominent kids show for decades, and probably still is. So one of the presenters on that show when I was a kid was Noni Hazlehurst, who is an actor who has been in lots and lots of different things. But I remember her reading this book, Crusher is Coming. I feel like it was Noni. Now I'm doubting myself. I'll have to double check and see if I'm right. See if I can find a clip of it online. I don't know if those clips would be online. Anyway, I don't know if I'll be able to verify that or not. But basically, this is a story about a boy whose friend is coming to visit, and the friend is called Crusher. Obviously, not his real name, but that's what they call him at school. And so you kind of imagine that he's this like real sort of tough character, and he's like, basically he's a footballer and all the rest of it. However, he's actually just really polite and gentle. But the boy has him coming to visit is kind of like, oh no, my sister has to not play with us, and Crusher's not going to want to have have that for dinner or whatever, and he's just like wanting to play with when Crusher comes, he plays with the little sister and is really polite to the mum and all of those kind of things. So it's a really sweet little book by Bob Graham, who wrote it and also illustrated it. And Bob Graham is still actively publishing books now, so he's been around for a very, very long time. I believe this one was published back in the 80s, first published in 1987, so a long time ago. Actually, when was the Richard Tulloch? That would probably be in the early 90s, I imagine. All right, 1989. So they're both of the same era, but that makes sense. It kind of dates me a little bit as well. So I'd recommend those too. Okay, I'm aware that this will have been a very long video. I've been filming now for over an hour with some pauses in between, but definitely for a long time. I just wanted to finish off the video by actually giving you some recommendations of some other books that you could include. So I'm not going to, because I've already read these books, but I thought that they might be helpful prompts for you for some of the different categories. So the first one is Storm Boy, written by Colin Teeley. This came out quite some time ago. This is a 40th anniversary edition, and it came out a long time ago. So it's definitely one that has been around for a while. So it could work for the classic. It's also set in South Australia, and it may be one that you read at school. I didn't read it at school, but I've certainly, as a teacher, used this book with some of my students in the past. So basically it's about a boy who lives with his dad, and they live rough by the sea, and he so a pelican dies, but the little boy manages to save 3 of its chicks, and kind of hand rears them to save them. 2 of the 3 go and don't come back, but 1 does, and he calls it Mr. Percival, and it's sort of about their relationship, and it kind of is also a bit of an environmental book. It's a really, really nice one. I gave it 4 stars when I read it, and yeah, would highly recommend. Just going to make a new pile there on the floor because my piles around me are very teetering at the moment. This is a book I read a long time ago, so long ago that I didn't give it a rating because it was before I was doing any kind of ratings of this kind. But I've kept it all these years. It's called Butterfly Song by Terry Jank, or Janky. And it's set in the Torres Strait Islands and also in Sydney, specifically Thursday Island. And it's about a woman who is a Torres Strait Islander. She's studying, she's just graduated law at Sydney University, and her family convince her to take a case which is an ownership claim of a pearl shell which is part of a deceased estate. So they're claiming that their family should have possession of this pearl shell, and basically she's new to it, and she's kind of learning about herself and questioning who she is and so on. So there's sort of that aspect to it. But also it's set at the time of the Mabo win in the courts in Australia, which was a really historic moment of basically First Nations land claims. So it's sort of kind of in amongst all of that that's going on as well. So yeah, would highly recommend this one, although it's been a very long time since I've read it. Butterfly Song by Terry Jank. Okay, we've got another gorgeous book from this same series I've been showing you. This is the one I was talking about, Ethel Turner, when I mentioned her biography. This is her most famous book called Seven Little Australians, and I gave this one 4 stars when I read it last year, this year, I think it was last year. And it's basically about a family of unruly children who have who live in what would now be probably the city, but at the time was the bush. And their father is in the army, and he's got, you know, these kids that basically run amok and do all sorts of things. It's actually really, you know, it starts off as sort of being quite the romp, but it does get a little dark at points. So just a warning there. It's not just, you know, all plain sailing. But yeah, 4 stars was my rating for that one, and it could work for the Australian classic. It also could be work for the being set in the bush prompt. I have to show you this book, which is Ober-Newton by Isabel Carmody. This was the debut novel of Isabel Carmody, who is one of my favourite Australian authors. She writes fantasy, mostly for children. She's got picture books and sort of junior fiction and YA, and I guess this would come under YA. So it's set, it's a kind of a dystopian book. It's set after a sort of apocalyptic event, and following from that, there's no like technology and so on anymore. And it's all about a girl who has enhanced mental abilities. Now, there are about 7 or 8 books in this series, so it's a long one. It is complete now, but it took her a long time to complete it. And this was the debut, and it's a 5-star from me. Another 4-star read was this one, Goodwood by Holly Throsby. This was a debut, so you could certainly include it in that category, or in the new to you author category if you've not read one of her books before. This was published in 2016, and it's about a small town called Goodwood, and 2 very different people that are seemingly unconnected go missing in the town, and it's sort of this big mystery that is overhanging everyone. It's set in 1992, and sort of about the kind of unfolding of that mystery and what has happened to these 2 missing people. A book that I have reviewed quite recently on my channel is called Love Objects. I gave it 4 stars, by Emily Maguire. And this is about it's told from 3 different perspectives. You've got Nick, who, which is short for Nicole, and she's 45, and she is a hoarder. And you also, we have Lena, who is her niece, and Will, who's her nephew, and their brother and sister. And we kind of get these alternating perspectives of this kind of somewhat dysfunctional family, but kind of going through some stuff, and how they kind of end up pulling together and, you know, kind of becoming better versions of themselves because of it. So I definitely really enjoyed this book, and it's set in Sydney, so you could include it there, or it may be a new to you author. Not a debut though, I discovered. I mentioned this one earlier, and it is Honeybee, which is probably one of my very favourite books that I've read this year, by Craig Silvey, and it's definitely a 5-star read for me. It's an unlikely friendship that is forged between a teenage boy, Sam, and an older man called Vic, when they both happen to arrive at the same overpass bridge at the same time to commit suicide. So they don't do that, and it sort of creates this bond between these two men, and it's set in Victoria, so you could include it there. But it's a beautiful book about this relationship, and it's also explores kind of some of the dysfunction in Sam's family, and also the relationship that Vic had with his late wife, and kind of how pure and amazing that relationship was, and how he's been impacted since her death. So yeah, it's just this really emotional book, but it's absolutely beautiful, and I would highly recommend it. Honeybee by Craig Silvey, but definitely a content warning for suicide. It's also a little bit about queerness, and Sam is kind of experimenting with that and sort of deciding who he is as a person. So if that journey sounds a bit intense for you, like because he goes through some stuff, like he definitely gets beaten up at one point, and there's some stuff goes on. So if that's not something that you're keen to read at a particular moment in time, I would certainly wait till you're feeling a bit stronger mentally before you kind of go into that. But I would 100% recommend this, and I think it's something that everybody should read because it's absolutely beautiful. And the last one I'm going to recommend to you today is called The Museum of Modern Love. Now, this is a bit cheeky because it's technically set in New York. It's not actually set in Australia, but it's an Australian author. And this was a 5-star read for me as well. And it's partly, I guess, also because of my interest in art. So it's set around Marina I'm going to get this name wrong. Abramovic. Marina Abramovic, who is a performance artist, and she did a 75-day artist residence in New York, and it was called The Artist is Present. And basically what people would do like she would sit in the room, and there was like a queue of people, and you would come and you would sit, and she would just, in between, she'd like close her eyes, and then she'd open her eyes, and she would just maintain eye contact with you for the however long you wanted to be there. So some people could only hack it for a few minutes, or a minute, whereas other people stayed for quite a long time. So it was all and you could just watch this going on, and this kind of like intense personal connection that she was making with complete strangers. It would have been a really intense thing for her, physically and mentally to do, and it was like for hours and hours at a time. She went into training and so on for it. So I was fascinated by that aspect of this story as well. But this is also the same author that wrote Bruni that I mentioned in one of the other categories, and this book won the Stella Prize in 2017. So it's also it's a great book. I would really highly recommend it. So if you just thought I would mention it because it's one that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about, but it is actually brilliant. So that is it. That is the Australian Reading Challenge. I would love for you to join me. You are very, very welcome to follow the link that will be in the description below to get to the challenge page on the Storygraph. Please come and join me if you'd like. Or if you don't want to do the whole challenge, maybe just add one Australian book to your TBR for 2022, and that will be a big win for me, in my opinion, just to get more Australian books out there. So hopefully you've heard a book that mentioned today. I've mentioned quite a lot, so hopefully there's something in here for you. But yeah, please feel free to chat with me down in the comments if there's something you want to talk more about or ask questions about any of the books that I've mentioned here today. And I'd certainly be happy to give you some 4 or 5 star review recommendations for other things in the future as well. So if that's something you're keen on, let me know down in the comments. All right. Thanks everyone. Thanks for stopping by, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.